Welcome back. So as promised, now we're going to grow the cluster. And I've mentioned that you have several choices. Now I'm going to do two demos. In the first one, I am going to add a host manually. I will on purpose bypass the quick start utility. Typically I would do that if, let's say, the new host is a little bit different. Ideally you want all the servers to pretty much look the same, but they don't necessarily have to be. So in this case, I am going to add SB03 onto SA vSAN 01. So how do I do it? Now the first thing I need to do is add that host to my distributed virtual switch. Once again, I want to bypass the quick start utility. Now if you take a look, when I select the cluster, if I go to configure, we added this utility back in 6.7 update 1. So the reason I'm going to do two demos is because the second one will use this tool, but the first one is going to be done manually. So as mentioned, the first thing I want to do is I need to add that host, I'm talking about SBES603, to the first distributed virtual switch. So what I'm going to do here is I am going to right click on the switch. I'm going to choose add and manage hosts. I'm going to say add host, and we're going to add, once again, SBES603. Now we want to add the remaining three cards. The way that it works in class, VMNIC 1 goes to uplink 1. That would be for VMs. VMNIC 2 goes to uplink 2. That would be for vMotion. And lastly, VMNIC 3 would go to uplink 3. We try to keep it simple. Now, what I'm going to do, I'm not going to migrate any VMs. So all I'm doing right now is I'm adding this host to the switch. Now, as soon as I do that, next what I want to do is I want to create the two VM kernel ports. I'm talking about the one for vMotion and the one for vSAN. So how do we do that? We select the host and we go to the configure tab. We go to VM kernel adapters and we click on add networking. Now the first VM kernel port is going to be, in this case, for vMotion. Make sure again that you remember in class we use DHCP, again, to speed up the demos. And make sure, of course, that if you do this, you remember to click on the box for vMotion. We use DHCP, so I expect to have an IP in the 172.20.12 network. If I see that, then I can move on. Let's take a look. There it is. Notice 172.20.12.209. And then I add one more VM kernel port. This one is going to be for virtual SAN. And again, this one is going to also use DHCP. And what I'm going to do here is I am going to proceed. And if I see an IP in the 10.10.10 range, then that means I did it right. Let's take a look. Perfect. The next step, all I have to do is drag them into the cluster. So at this point, this fifth host, all he's doing here, he is basically adding right now CPUs and memory. And the very next step, the very last step, if you will, would be the one where I create a disk group for that particular host. Then what that would do is it would grow my data store from 200 gigs onto 250 gigs. Let's make sure that this completes successfully. Okay. And like I said, the last step would be, I would go to the cluster. I would go to configure. I would scroll down and I would click on disk management. And then of course, I would add X number of disk groups. Here in class, you would only be able to add one disk group with only one cache and one capacity device. So that concludes my first demo. Thank you guys. Go take a little break. When you come back, you get to see another way to add hosts. I'll see you in a few minutes. Thank you guys. Okay, then this is demo number 2 for lesson number 2. Welcome back, guys. So now, let's do something else. Now, in the previous demo, you saw me add manually a host to the cluster, and we grew the cluster size. Back then, of course, from 200 gigs to 250. Now, I want you to notice right now, I've added a 6 host. Now, this is for a future demo. So if you take a look right now, I could easily go to one of the hosts and notice again, right now my vSAN data store is a lot bigger. Now I have 6 servers times 50 gigs, that's 300 gigs. Remember, you don't have to use the command line. For obvious reasons, I could go to the data store view. And again, what I could do here is I could actually choose SA vSAN data store 01. And then I would see 300 gigs in the upper right. Now again, you can ignore this data store. If you take a look, I could try to unmount it, but again, this is for something else. Okay, so what we're going to do next is we're going to play with manually creating and taking apart things. Now, in the previous lesson, we were talking about adding disks to the disk group, adding more disk groups, removing a disk from a disk group, or removing disk groups. So that's what this demo is for. So let's take a look. Right now I have 6 servers in my cluster. All of them are pretty much identical. They all have one disk group. If I go to this management, notice you have 6 servers, 1 disk group per server, and every disk group, you can see, has 1 cache and 1 capacity device. So, during the lecture we talked about claim and use disks, add disks, and so on. Now let's see what happens in this case. If I click on claim and use disks, now I could use this. So in one shot, I could create maybe another disk group in each host. But you can see I don't have any more disks. So therefore, I cannot proceed here. Now let's say I hadn't seen that, and I just wanted to add a disk group in one host. What I would do at that point is I would select one host, and then I would create a disk group from here. But once again, I just told you, we don't have any more disks. All I would have to do here is choose which disk is going to be used for cache and which was for capacity. Now when you take a look, here, you can see I can select the disk group. And if I wanted to remove a disk from a disk group, I would do it like this. I would select that disk, and again, I would choose remove disk. Now the problem here, once again, is that we only have one capacity disk in the disk group. So if you take a look, what would happen in this case if I try to choose, for example, full data migration? Now you can see again, I get a warning here, and it says, hey, this disk is about to be removed from the disk group. Removing all HDD or SSDs from the disk group will remove the entire disk group. So I don't want to do that. And if you take a look, let's see what kind of message we get. If we try to remove the cache disk from the disk group, notice this choice is grayed out. I can't do that because, again, like I said before, I would end up with no disk group. In previous versions of vSAN, you could do that, and again, it would just take apart the entire disk group. But notice now with the vSphere client, you can't. You can't even proceed. So, if I needed to remove a disk group, one of the things that I could try to do is what? I could select, for example, a disk group, and I would click right here in the 3 dots. And again, from here, I could choose remove. So that would free up 2 drives. And again, you can see other choices, including, for example, recreate. I had to do that once. That was more for troubleshooting purposes. So when you take a look, you also have mount and unmount. And I'll explain that later on. So I just want to do a quick demo showing you all the possibilities. Now, if we want to remove a disk group, for example, we could try, just for kicks, to remove the one from one of the new servers. So remember, right now, my vSAN data store is once again 300 gigs. Let's see what happens if I decide to delete the only disk group in that host. Once again, I click on the three dots and I choose remove. The system would ask me again what to do with the data. You have three choices: full data migration, ensure accessibility, and of course, lastly, no data migration. So I am going to go in this case with full data migration. Now remember, you could use this particular icon, but I'm just going to skip forward. And I'm going to say remove the disk group. If I look at the recent tasks, this should probably take about 30 seconds. Remember, the idea is technically I'm shrinking the vSAN data store from 300 gigs to 250. And then that turns that host into a compute-only host. Now, I'm not saying I recommend that by any means, but again, you could technically, after the first three, have hosts that all they bring to the table is CPU and memory. So let's take a look. It looks like it just finished. Notice the disk group is gone. And now I'm going to recreate it. I'm going to click on create disk group. And I'm going to separate here the 5 gig drive. That's going to be my cache disk. And my 50 gig drive will be my capacity. I click on create. A few seconds from now, I'm going to have a brand new disk group and 50 more gigs. So I'm going back from 250 gigs to 300 gigs. So hopefully you enjoyed that demo. Now we're going to do the last lesson of this chapter. I'll see you in lesson number 3. Thank you, guys.